right, I clicked the button. Hey,
Nice.
hopefully people can see us. I'm going to go over to make sure that I have this popped up in Facebook so I can see people's comments. All right. All right, we are here with Justin Greenwood. I'm John Market from Heroic Girls, and we're going to talk a little bit about comic books as part of the continuing Quarantine coverage. Justin and I almost missed this because we were just chit-chatting and
Dragons.
talking about Dungeons and Dragons and comic book artists we like and things like that. So Justin, if you didn't know, is the current artist on Stumptown with Greg Rucka, and he just finished up a great miniseries, Crone, which we're going to talk about. And so, Justin, I wanted to talk to you first thing about your kind of variety of art that you've done. You've done sword and sandal fantasy.
Yeah.
You've done hard-boiled detectives, historical biographies. I did not know the Hamilton book, which I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Science fiction. And the one thing that I looked over, like your portfolio, and I didn't see was superheroes, which I think is kind of like the bread and butter of the industry. That's the way most people got in. Is that intentional by interest, or is that just something that kind of happened? I mean, what is your feeling about superheroes? You don't seem to have any that you've drawn.
I do love superheroes, and it was definitely my entry. I mean, I was a big Marvel X-Men kid growing up, and I still read a lot of those books, but I don't know. I think stylistically, when I was finishing college and thinking like, okay, I'm gonna take a run at comics, looking at my art style, I was like, oh, it's probably a better fit for more of the indie stuff, and I kind of found my way in a totally different way. Like, I only really worked in creator-owned comics for 10 years.
Right.
Some work for not a lot of it. But it's funny you mentioned it because I just was having this conversation with a writer friend, and we're plotting a book for early next year. And I think finally it will be end up doing something that's kind of superhero-ish.
You're finally going to have some capes and underwear on the outside type characters.
Yeah. I feel like this last 3 years between the Hamilton book and Crone, Last Siege, like there's been a lot of period-related stuff.
Right.
I mean, Crone's not really a specific period, but it is kind of in that same vein of dirt and
it's
sandals and boots.
It's a high fantasy, Conan. That's the era we're talking about.
Yeah, and even the one I'm working on next, I'm working on a series. It hasn't been announced yet, but it'll probably be seeing the light of day at the end of the year, early next year. Is also kind of a historical piece too. So I don't know. I didn't plan it like that. I think in terms of phases, but it's just worked out that way. And next year, I'm kind of looking forward to doing something that's outside of that, just for the change, if nothing else.
Well, you're certainly varied. I mean, there isn't like one thing that you've been doing there. It's just I thought it was odd for the amount of work that you've put out that it's never come up. That I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love the books, and I honestly, and this is maybe I might be way off on this. I'll let you know in like a year, but I feel like that stuff, the superhero stuff, will be kind of easier. Like there's something about rendering big, strong people, and I don't know those outfits are so easy to draw that I feel like it's going to be a breeze when the time comes. Because
sounds like the kind of thing you say and then you regret deeply later. But but you could be 100% right. But anytime you predict something's going to be really easy, it always ends up the opposite, in my experience.
So, I might end up hating spandex. I don't know, but I know stylistically it'll be a lot different. Like it's a lot slicker than what I'm doing now, which is I've kind of been moving into has a lot of texture and it's kind of rough. And I don't know, it's interesting. I do look forward to the challenge, though. I think it'll be fun.
Now, I was thinking about the role of artists in the industry, just in general. Like, I remember back in the 1990s, because I'm old, artists were such a big deal that Jim Lee got Chris Claremont kicked off of the X-Men so that he could write the book. And then when they founded Image Comics with like Lee McFarlane, Liefeld, and all those guys, they took 5 artists, went over and founded a comic book company and decided they didn't need to bring any writers with them.
Yeah.
And, the pendulum was really far in favor of the artist now. And then today I look and I think the pendulum has swung a little bit more in the direction of the writer. How do you see the balance between creators, between writers and artists right now as partners? Is it more equal than it used to be? Is it are the writers getting a little bit more cred, or where's that balance at?
I mean, I think the perception is definitely that writers kind of hold more juice, and I think there's a lot of truth in that when you see how things move in other media. But I don't have that relationship, thankfully, and maybe I just got really lucky when I started. But I still work with a lot of the same people now that I kind of started out at. Like even, I mean, 5-10 years later, a lot of people I met in the first few years, I still work with a lot.
Right.
And those dynamics were always set on the intention of we're equal partners and we both bring something to this. So let's put our heads together and be willing to collaborate. And I think I've just been spoiled. I've never had the mentality where I feel like I'm taking direction. And I think if I did, I would have a different feeling about it too.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a different, I guess.
Yeah. We have a viewer, Chris, who's saying that you frequently wear spandex. I'm not sure.
I know this viewer because he reached out and said he'd be viewing.
Yeah.
Great news.
Great news. So, all right. So there's my generic questions. I want to talk a little bit about Crone.
Sure.
So let's just do the first one. What can you set up the book for us? Tell us what it's about.
One thing I've never gotten good at is concisely breaking down log lines, but I'm going to try. You can be better, I think. But it's basically about an aged sword fighter who at one time was the greatest ever, and she has hung up her sword. And many years later, she has to return to the fight and find it in herself to be the person that she used to be.
Right.
That would be.
I think that sums up the book pretty well. So it was a 5-issue limited series, and the last issue just came out before everything in the world crashed down around us.
Yeah.
So if you are looking for something to read while on lockdown, I'm going to highly recommend Crone. It's a really fun sword and sandals adventure, and it's the kind of protagonist you don't see very often. An older woman, but when I was reading it, and there's just no way to avoid it, this felt a lot like a Red Sonja pitched. I mean, was this originally something that was, you went to Dynamite and said, hey, we got this idea for Red Sonja, and then they passed and you said, oh, she's now Bloody Bliss? Or was it always considered to be like an homage or a pastiche of that kind of character?
Yeah. And I think that's fair. Dennis Culver, who's the writer and my partner on the book, when he pitched it, he didn't say I'd ever pitch this anywher else, and if he did, I don't know that. But I think he probably definitely wrote it with Red Sonja in mind. The way he sold it to me was like, hey, man, what do you think about doing a book that was kind of like if Red Sonja met Unforgiven? And I thought that's a pretty interesting image. We were having breakfast, and he painted me this picture. Actually, it's specifically in the book. It's one of the first few pages of her standing on the edge of this cliff, and it's at the end of her life, trying to decide whether she's willing to kind of move forward or not. And
yeah.
And I just love the image. It really stuck with me. I love the idea, and I thought I love vendetta stories, and I love stories about underdogs who have to find it themselves to fight forward. And it was just such an interesting take on it and an interesting way to present it that I thought this is just a home run. Cool idea.
I remember that moment, and the thing that it reminded me of was the opening of The Dark Knight Returns, when Bruce Wayne is driving the thing. He said, "This would be a good way to die, but not good enough." It had that same kind of story beat where it's an older hero past their prime looking for some way to end everything because they feel out of it, and then getting pulled back in. It had not the story itself is very different than The Dark Knight, but that one moment had that brought that to mind when I read it. I thought it was pretty cool.
Friend who had sold the book that same way too. I think he had sold it as Red Sonja meets Dark Knight Returns, and the same because there's a lot of thematic overlap.
Yeah, I think that I didn't even think about it until I thought about that one moment. But looking at it, I can see some parallels actually in the story. But I think that's become kind of a trend in comic books recently. Old Man Logan kind of started it, and then Marvel just said, "Oh, here's a new cash cow, Old Man Hawkeye, Old Man." They've done like 5 or 6 of those different books showing what these heroes at the end of their life coming back for one last fight. And I think it's kind of a neat story. It is like The Unforgiven. I think we like seeing those kind of stories, and I think it's been interesting seeing older heroes at the forefront in comic books, which is not something that you get very often at any rate.
No, I don't think you do. I think most stories are about the most idealized version of that character, of whatever character that is. I think personally, what I find interesting is seeing what's less idealized. Like I like seeing where their life is, and then how they figured that out. And I think. I look at a lot of the books I work on, and that may be the one through line between all of them. There a lot of the stuff I work on has to do with characters who are not perfect, pretty far.
So that does bring up something. You brought that up, and this actually dovetails into a question I was going to ask. comic books are known for selling those idealized versions of people. That's kind of the bread and butter of comic books, and then that kind of core base are the ones that complain when you deviate too much from that. Is it harder to pitch a book when you're going in and you're saying, "Hey, we're gonna have an old woman as the central character, or someone who's not physically appealing, that doesn't have that we can get Art Germ to draw a pin-up cover on the front"? I mean, when you're pitching a book like that, that's more story and character driven and doesn't have like a youthful, attractive central lead, does that make it a more difficult pitch?
I honestly don't know, because I've never really done it a different way. And I think I think it's probably a harder sell. I mean, at least on paper, because we love glamour and we love like big, beautiful things to kind of sell a book. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a combination of oftentimes working with writers who end up doing that job. So I don't know how much work it was for them to initially sell the idea to a publisher.
Right.
And part of it is just I've never really done it another way. I've never presented the other thing as a comparison.
Right.
But, fortunately, I haven't had knock on wood, a terrible time finding projects get approved. I mean, some of them are easier than others. That's definitely true. But
right.
I kind of lead by the idea, like if I feel really strongly about something, if I really love something, somebody probably publish it, I think, because I think there's an idea good enough. Like I have 2 other projects I'm working on right now that are in super early development, and neither one has a publisher, but I'm so certain about the content that I'll get pretty far into it before we even pitch it. And it was that way with Crone.
Right.
The whole issue of Crone before we even pitched it either, because I just felt like this idea is so good, I'll be really surprised if we can't find a publisher.
Yeah, and it's worked, and I want to be clear. This is not like just a comic book industry. I mean, movies and television, everybody's always putting the pretty people front and center. And when you make them build a movie around Helen Mirren, it's always a harder sell than if it's Jennifer Lawrence. That's just the reality of the world. But I like Helen Mirren, so yeah. So keeping in with Crone, what did you find that to keep you excited? What do you really like drawing in Crone? Because it's a cool book, and it's a genre that I'm not sure if you've done exactly this genre before. So what kinds of things did you find that you liked drawing?
Well, I think it was a lot of action, which I really liked. It came off of working on Last Siege, which was based in literal history, so it was kind of nice to just make stuff up. I mean, the nice thing about fantasy is there's no rules, so as long as you think it looks cool, that's pretty much the only criteria, or your partner thinks it looks cool too. So, a lot of those designs, we just kind of riff on stuff that we think, oh, this would be really interesting, and then if we both like it, we just run with it. There's a freedom in that is really feels fun. It's like that in science fiction too. I mean, as long as you ground it in something that people can relate to, you have a lot of room to just sort of play visually, and I think that's one of the things I enjoyed the most.
So, okay. Well, anyways, that's my list of smart sounding questions about Crone, but I do want to tell people again, it's just a really fun book. You should pick it up. It's a story I have not seen before. People are always drawing these idealized women, and you do get a little flashback of that, but I can't remember the last time I saw an action book centered around an older female protagonist, and you did a great job with it, and I really enjoyed it. So now I want to move on to the one that I think most people probably know you for, which is Stumptown, the book that you're drawing with Greg Rucka writing. Yeah. You took over the book kind of at this point, kind of midway through its run and then ongoing. Yeah. Matthew Sutherland was the original artist. So when you're taking, I'm sorry?
At Southworth?
Southworth. Oh, yeah. God dang it. Southworth, thank you for making me running a highlight over the fact that I wrote his name down wrong. And I've met him, so let's just pretend this didn't happen. But you took over from Matt, and it was an established book that had been going for a while. Yeah. When you're taking over a book like that, that's only had one artist and one interpretation of the character all the way up until this point, how do you decide what you're going to keep and what's going to be yours? I mean, does it even work like that, or did you just start with a blank piece of paper and say this is going to be my interpretation of Dex, or did you look at what Matthew done and then said, here's how I can build on the bones he's already laid down?
Yeah. I think in general that can be kind of intimidating, but I got to say my first few projects were all projects where a book had a previous artist and then I came on to work on it. So I feel like I'd already had that experience enough to feel comfortable digging in. But I should say with Stumptown, I read the comic first. So I was reading it as a fan and then getting to work on it was like, oh man, this is going to be rad. So I guess I think what I probably did, thinking back, is I just drew the character, all the characters, in a bunch of this material a bunch of times until I felt like I had my feeling on it. It's not an active like, oh, I'm going to get rid of this or make sure I keep. It's just sort of like you want to do your take on what you think is interesting about the character, and hopefully, like in this case, Greg feels the same way. Like basically, just trying to pare it down to the things that make Dex who Dex is, and then putting that on top of how you would draw it. You know.
I get it, and I'm so happy for the success. I want to congratulate you on the success of the book because Stumptown was one of those, odd little black and white, detective story comics that, because I follow Greg Rucka around like a puppy dog, I was buying, and it was one that I was always telling people about. It's a book I was always pushing in people's hands, saying, "You will like this story. I don't care if you don't read comics, read it." And I assume that the TV show has done a tremendous amount to kind of boost the profile of the book up there.
It has, and it's pretty surreal. I mean, I had a kind of a similar thing where the book had been gone for a couple of years, I think, at least, or on a hiatus before I came to it. And so working on it was a lot of like really late nights working on this project. And it's funny talking about solitary work now in light of what's going on in the world, but it's very, I had just had kids and I was working late at night a lot. And I remember working on a lot of at least the third volume that way. And you feel like you're the only one who's like, it feels very intimate, like it's very small, Right. And, the book comes out and people read it, and then all of a sudden the TV show comes and it's like, man, everybody knows these characters are. That's a pretty trippy thing. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing, and I'm glad that the book has seen better. It's hitting a broader audience now as a result because I really love the book and I'm excited to do more of it.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, it had been years of me thinking of it as like my secret special friend, and then I went to San Diego Comic-Con that year, and then there was a hotel, and they had Dex Perios, for the TV show, but they had this giant Colby Smulders that was like 30 stories tall, Stumptown. That was like, well, I guess it's not my secret anymore, is it? Everybody knows Stumptown. So, Stumptown is largely black and white, although you've done some color issues too, I think. And does your art style change at all when you know that it's going to remain black and white and not get colored? Is there a different way that you draw, or is it about the same whether a colorist is going to come after you or not?
Two things. One, Stumptown was color. It was coming out at a time when there was a lot of other black and white stuff Greg was doing, like whiteout and stuff. So it's a common thought, but. Personally, I you know what? I draw with a lot of contrast anyway, and I'm kind of heavy-handed. So it's less to do. I think now it's less to do with whether it's going to be color and more to do with who's coloring it. So like I there are colorists I work with where I know for sure if I leave something really open, they're going to handle it a certain way, and that's very comforting and exciting. But there's other colors where I'm not really sure, and I'll go in and make certain that is clear. And there's when you can leave something vague or when you have that relationship with a colorist, I think the work comes out so much better because you're leaving a little bit more open to interpretation. I feel a little more careful depending on who the colorist is, more so than if it's going to be color or not. If it's going to be black and white, I definitely take a different approach, but I don't think about it as much as I do who's coloring it, honestly. Yeah.
So it's funny. I right before this interview, I went and read all of Crone because I had them stacked there and I hadn't read them all yet. And obviously you're pointing out to me I should have gone back and read Stumptown because I'm making mistakes on Stumptown that I didn't think I would make.
Come on, man, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I think I did. I just read Queen and Country again recently. I think I just got them bled in my mind. All the Ruckas blends together.
I did too. But that book was awesome. In fact, I didn't realize how long it ran until recently. I went back and had reread everything, and that's an awesome book.
Yeah, it's a really long book, and there's another one that I think it's been kicked around to be a movie or a TV show a couple times, and at some point someone's going to bite on that, and that'll be another book that people will will gain in prominence, and people will go back and give it another look. It's a great book.
I agree.
Pretty much, if you see Greg's name on a book, you can just go ahead and pick it up. It's probably going to be a good time. So,
He's awesome.
So speaking of Rucka, he said that one of the things that he really likes about you as an artist is your ability to draw what he called frumpy decks. Is that a compliment?
It is.
He likes your ability to draw frumpy.
Him and I have talked about this before, but I don't really draw pretty people to begin with, which is probably why I leaned into characters of a certain kind anyway. But I mean, it gets back to the same thing we were talking about. Like I tend to lean into what's less ideal anyway. So
right,
it's like I think Greg is such like when you talk to him about the book in general, he's so warm that I know that is complimentary, but it may not sound the most pleasant. But he's right, honestly. Like that is true. It's true of the character, and I think. It's kind of true of the spirit of how I draw that whole world in general, you know?
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and I do think it's a compliment, and I just thought it was funny. So I was looking back, and I found an interview with you and Greg when you first joined the book, and I'm going to read something here. He said, the goal is to make Stumptown an ongoing title. And how's that working out?
Well, that's a great question. It was going pretty well, and then we both. I mean, look, there's not an easy answer. It's one of those things where we finished the fourth volume and we thought like, oh, okay, cool. I think here's what we'll do for the fifth one, and then put it aside on a break, and then that break lasted a long time. But on the positive side, we had been talking about coming back to it for almost a couple years in
right.
And I genuinely can say with some certainty that it should be coming back very soon. In fact, it's on our schedule for this year. So, I mean, the timing, if we were going to bring it back, it couldn't be better timed than alongside the show happening. So if it was an issue of prioritizing, it's definitely a higher priority than it was. But I mean, look,
that's okay.
It's a matter of jumping back in, and I don't know, Greg's last couple of years has been super busy. I've been super busy. So we're just glad that, to be getting back into it. I hoping to be working on it in a few months.
Well, that was a completely selfish question. Stumptown is one of my favorite books. So if somehow my whining and lobbying gets Stumptown to come out 2 weeks earlier, I'll feel like this interview was a success. But when people, there are comic book nerds that complain every time comic books are translated into a new medium, like if they become a movie or it becomes a television show, they'll say, oh, they changed this or that from the comics. I've never been an absolutist like this, because I do think that work has to adapt to the medium that it's in, and there's just no getting around that. So the television version of Dex is obviously a version of Dex, but is different than the comic book version of Dex. How do you compare those two? I mean, what do you think the big differences are between TV Dex and comic book Dex?
I tell you, it was a big concern, and I get why that's a concern, because something that you really care about, you don't want to see it translated in a way that you can't feel good about. What I like about the show is they really took elements of the comic. I feel like they really nailed the key things in the comic that make the comic work.
Right.
I think that's true of Dex too. Like, I don't feel like Dex is way different. I just think I think what they've kind of done that's interesting is they've rounded out the cast in a way to, like, Gray's a completely different character at this point, right?
Yeah. He's
What's that?
The neighbor that he's not just the neighbor that watches Ansel and pines after. He's got a little more agency in the story.
Right. And I think the dynamic, the reason they made that choice makes complete sense, and it suits the TV show. I don't think it needed to be that way for the comic, but I think for the show, having the bar and having that whole setup makes a lot of sense. So I'm really happy with what they're doing. I don't think of Dex as being radically different, really. It's more that they just broadened out some of the other stuff that I think works awesome. Yeah. I've been really impressed. Like, it's a very nerve-wracking thing when somebody picks up material you've been working on and says, okay, we have an idea for this. What do you think about this? And, like, you don't know what you're going to get back, really, from the beginning, you know?
Yeah. I always think of it like Elseworlds or like a What If. It's just a different version of the character, recognizable, but you can't sit there and sweat every little detail about as long as they got the core of the character right. And I feel they did.
Yeah, I think they did too. Thank you. It's funny. I had that feeling recently watching Daredevil. Did you see the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie?
I did back in the day. Yeah, I did.
It was crazy. it's like the perfect example of something that like could have been good, but they just, in my opinion, but they just missed the thematic things that make Daredevil interesting. It's like they're just missing.
Right. They had a couple visuals. They copied that the Daredevil up on the a steeple of the church bleeding out scene. They opened movie with it, I think.
Yeah.
They had a couple comic book visuals. I remember what happened. The movie was come out and it was a fairly low budget movie. And then the first Spider-Man came out right before it came out and made $1 bajillion. So they just pumped a bunch more money into it and tried to improve special effects in the fight scenes and did a couple reshoots.
Yeah.
I wonder what it would have been like if it just remained its like low budget self if they hadn't, tried so hard. Maybe our expectations wouldn't have been that so high. But
yeah, in my memory, he Daredevil kills somebody in like the first like 20 minutes. I remember thinking like, I don't think that fits. Like I think that's the exact difference. Yeah. Details don't have to matter, but if the character does things that you don't feel like the character would do, it's really distracting.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question from the crowd. Do you prefer color or black and white books? Do you have one that you like more than the other?
Oh, I do. Let's see. In my mind, when I started out, I was doing black and white because that was, you're just trying to get your own stuff together, and I didn't have any color, and I liked it. And then I got into color and really liked all the options it gave me. But recently, I've been reading a lot more manga and thinking about black and white a lot more. And if I had the right story, I think I would like to. I mean, I used to paint moderately well, and I feel like I've fallen off terribly because I haven't been doing it. But I would love to do something with wash, even if it was just black and white, but using texture washes. I think that could be really interesting. But I think the story really defines that thing. And so if the story feels like it needs color, it should have color. And if it doesn't, then we don't need it.
So speaking of Stumptown and the TV show, you, Greg, and Matthew are all listed as executive producers on the show.
Yeah.
So is that actually a job, or is it like in the Midwest when some small town elects a dog as a mayor? I mean, do you guys do stuff on the show, or I mean, because like Stan Lee executive produced like everything, and I'm not sure he even saw some of those sets. So I was just curious, what's the role of executive producer? I've never met someone who actually did it, so I'm curious what you do.
I think that role can be pretty broad. It can be exactly like what you're saying, where you're just on the outside looking in, and then it can be the other way, where you're super involved and you're in a writing room with everybody every day. My relationship is much more distant. Like I'm not in that writing room at all. But the benefits of being able to go down and talk to them at the beginning when the show was developing, it was a lot of conversation, and then when the thing was established and running, it's other than getting an early look at some of the episodes, it's pretty hands off, and I think. I prefer that with comics. Like once I understand what I'm supposed to be doing, I'd rather be left alone. I kind of feel like unless I have something to add to them that I feel like they need to have, it should be the same way. But like I got to go down to check out the set and hang out with the showrunner and meet everybody. And I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff that does come with it. But I think personally, I'm pretty hands off. I don't know if Greg might have a more involved relationship with them. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, no, a fair answer. I just it struck me that. And one other thing that struck me about you and Matthew in particular being executive producers is, were you surprised that you were given the opportunity to come in and be a part of the TV show in that way? Because I can think of one very high profile television show adapted from a comic book where the writer, when he hit that point, all of a sudden cut the artist out of the deal completely. We're not going to mention anybody's name, but obviously it speaks to the relationship that you guys have with Greg and each other, that when it came time to make it into a TV show, it was everybody doing it together rather than just saying, oh, it's Greg's project and Greg's the guy.
No, Greg's an awesome partner. And it's something you talked about at the beginning is like, what if down the road? And this was many years ago. Like, what if? And, I think in this day and age with creator-owned comics, you kind of have to have those conversations at the beginning because you should technically be business partners, and sometimes those conversations don't go well. Sometimes they go great. I've been really lucky. All the partners I have we are equal partners on these projects, and this was true also. I'll tell you what's awesome about Greg though is when that conversation started, it was with him specifically first, and always leading the charge to make sure that that's an equal thing, that I'm involved in, and that's something I really appreciate about him.
Yeah, he's. I've never met anybody that said anything bad about Greg Rucka. In fact, I was the last one of these I did with a comic book professional was Kelly Sue DeConnick. And because we started talking about Portland, she went to Stumptown, and then she's singing Greg's praises, and everybody likes Greg Rucka. So I think we're out of time. So they're supposed to move on and do the next thing in QuaranCon here. Justin, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I want everybody to run out. Call your local comic book shop. See if they have those back issues of Crone. Pick them up. The shops could really use your help, and the book itself is just really fantastic. Get Stumptown because it's just a fantastic book. I know you have other stuff in the works that you can't talk about. We're looking forward to that. Everybody, Justin Greenwood, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Good talking to you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye now. All right.